Hey YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Bit of a channel update today because it's a momentous day. I woke up to find 250,061 views on my total views scroll. That's kind of a feather in the cap. I was looking forward to it. I could see, every day as I write on my calendar what the total views are, because that's the only way of keeping track of it, because with a mobile phone and no computer, I can't go and have a look at all the shiny, brightly coloured graphs and the stats and all the rest of it that you fellas can, and you ladies too. No, I got into the habit years ago of scrolling through my movies and adding up the views with a calculator, and it was like a year, maybe a year and a half, before I found that I could click onto my own channel and get to my own channel page and I could find it. Yeah, they've got an automatic view counter there. Okay, so I could see I was approaching 250,000, and I'm also approaching my 53rd birthday, and I was in a conceited, egomaniacal fashion looking forward to seeing if I could observe 250,000 views before I observed 53 circumnavigations of the sun. And therefore, last week when I woke up and found that BBC Worldwide had filed a false copy wrong DCMA violation notice with YouTube, and I'd lost the most viewed movie on my scroll, and I'd lost 18,000 views with it, I was particularly upset. And I wailed and moaned and made a few movies about it, and most of the people who commented were quite empathetic and empathic and sympathetic, and a whole bunch of them came up with suggestions and explanations. But there was one, a fella called Ken Riccio Poems, who was quite snarky, and as a very special treat, I'm going to give Ken Riccio a personal answer. There he is there, capital K, small e, small n, new word, capital R, small I-C-C-I-O, new word, small P-O-E-M-S. And I don't know what he's like as a poetry critic, but as a movie critic he's up to shit. He says, "Are you kidding me or what? I can never understand people like you. You think this has gone with the wind or something." No capitals, he doesn't recognise titles. "Holy shit, what would happen if you made a real movie with a script and storyline and real actors? Are you people insane? You, just like the rest of the nuts on YouTube, have not created anything. Dilutions, D-I-L-U-T-I-O-N-S, of grandeur." Now, if he'd punctuated everything else correctly, I would suggest that that was quite a nice, ironic, sardonic, sarcastic twist of the spelling. But because he's fucked up all the rest of his punctuation, I'd have to say it's a spelling mistake. Dilutions of grandeur. Copyright on what? Some stupid picture with a $1,000 camera? That, T-H-E-T, only thing you have right here is Google Plus sucks. Even the garbage man wants t ... because this Thread anti-troll program has cut him off at about that point. Okay, so the bloke who's got tickets on himself to the point where he has a special poetry channel, Ken Riccio Poems, is such a piss-poor cinematographic critic that he can't tell the difference between a video shot on a $120 mobile phone, edited in the head because there's no technology or software to cut and shut the movie, just shoot in sequence, edit in camera. He can't tell the difference between that and a movie using a proper $1,000 video camera. He then suggests that it's somehow much more creative to sit on your ass and slowly scratch your head and figure out a script and work out all the angles of the dangles and figure out how many hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars worth of equipment and assistants and helpers and workers and actors you need to make your vision concrete, than it is to have a mobile phone in your pocket while you're using a chainsaw to clear a fallen tree off a fence, and notice that, shit, it's pretty unusual to have a tree with a pulse, bright red, and put the chainsaw down and clean the lens on the camera and switch it from mobile phone receiving to video camera and then spontaneously, impulsively, before the phenomenon subsides, narrate a short movie which tells the story. Now, I don't know, maybe I've got tickets on myself, but in terms of actually getting the job done when you've got no second chances and you haven't got a fudge factor of millions of dollars worth of equipment and other people and other people's talents to hide your own fuck-ups and mistakes, I'd say I actually did a purer job of making a narrative documentary than, say, Steven Spielberg did with The Saving of Private Ryan. It's just a different way of looking at things, Ken Riccio films. And because it was and is the most viewed movie on my scroll, yes, I had a right to be pissed off. And any attempt to gainsay or belittle the footage is kind of shot out of the water by the fact that when BBC Nature Events decided they wanted to make a documentary called Nature's Weirdest Events, and it was a 56-minute documentary, the first item up there was a walking catfish that's invading Florida because it's a feral animal. Their third item was bees that live too close to a Marachismo cherry factory and they produce red honey, and some other bees that live near a motorcar workshop and they're producing green honey from the radiator coolant solution. But the second item was bleeding trees, and the most spectacular footage that they had was my footage of a cut tree bleeds bright red with a pulse. The BBC, the people who make the documentary about Nature's Weirdest Events, had my footage up there to illustrate the second weirdest thing they could find in nature. Firmly tongue-in-cheek, mind you, because it was a movie not pitched at the highbrow audience, is all I can say. Not pitched at the highbrow audience. But, you know, how many of Ken Riccio's poems have been taken up by the BBC's poetry program? Fucking zero. And while we're at it, on the topic of poetry, Ken Riccio poems, I was appointed poet in residence by the Environment Centre at Armidale. I replaced Judith Wright. You go and Google Judith Wright Australian poetry, see what you get, Ken Riccio poems. I was also named concert performance poet for the University of New England Armidale Friends of the Earth chapter. So I'm pretty good at poetry, and I'm fairly happy with my movies. And because it sets a higher level of difficulty, I don't have highly specialised equipment. I figure that the cameras in a mobile phone are actually pretty bloody good, you know, in taken against cameras over the last 100 years. I'm happy to say that I'm still pushing mine and I'm still finding its limits. Right, so that's Ken Riccio poems put back in his box and labelled Raw Prawn with a Cooked Head of the Week. A few other people have left comments that I feel I should address. There's been a bunch of people who say that I should get a computer. Oh, you have to have a computer, you need a computer to access, you could do this, you could talk that, you could Skype the other bloody thing, you could comment here, there and everywhere. 35 years ago, 1977, I went to Lucas Heights as part of a school excursion to look at their computer. It was a mainframe, it took up a factory warehouse size, full of tape drives with, you know, 18-inch, 2-foot diameter reel-to-reel tapes. People were talking to it using boxes of punch cards. You know, the boffins in their white coats spend weeks thinking up a question, translate it into punch card, feed it to the computer, chunka, 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 chunk, blink, 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 the lights. All the fucking tape drives move in the next room. They look it through the wall, the window. Oh yes, everything's happening. And then after a while the computer chunka chunka chunk punches more holes in the cards and they get a different box and they go home and spend a week figuring out what the computer told them to do. Well, they were pretty clever people once, but their computer was running a research reactor and the research reactor generated waste heat and they were water cooling it. Now if you take cold water and you heat it, it becomes less dense. And once it's less dense, it's not as heavy and it rises. So if you feed cold water in at the bottom, hot water comes out at the top. It shouldn't have been too difficult to set their reactor up so that when they shut it down in idle mode, it would pump its own coolant fluid via a thermosiphon principle. But they didn't do that. They had an arrangement with a bloke to sit on a bulldozer up in the Hunter River Valley, and he was going to push coal into a power station to light a fire, to boil water, to blow steam on a turbine, and the turbine was going to spin a wheel covered with magnets, and that was going to excite electrons, and they were going to run the excited electrons through the copper wire for 150 miles, and then stick that into an electric motor to run a water pump to keep their nuclear reactor cold even when it was shut down. And that struck me as bloody stupid. They had the same arrangement with the bloke on his bulldozer and the coal-fired power station to run the electric water pump for their used fuel rods. And surely a bloody hot cylinder can be put inside a pipe and given a cold water manifold at the bottom and hot water comes out the top. At least that's how I would have done it when I was 17. And I decided there and then that computers were a great way to send clever people stupid, because they bedazzled themselves with technology that was counterproductive. And for 35 years everybody bloody laughed at me. And then a bit of a tidal wave hit a place called Japan, and a thing called the Fuck You Shimmer Daiichi nuclear power station, which produced nuclear steam kettle electricity, and they relied on grid-fed power for their coolant pumps. And the coolant pumps got flooded by the tidal wave, and the fucking reactors melted down 4 times, and they're still worried about what to do about the boiling used fuel pools. So I was right. I was 100% correct. At the same time, the only way they could demonstrate the cleverness of their computer to a bunch of high school kids was to show us a video game. Now, I used to be the sort of kid who would, sneak into the parents' bedroom and steal whatever money they had lying around and take it and turn it into handfuls of 20-cent pieces to go to the show and feed them to the video machines. Or I'd hit the video arcades in Sydney, and I'd spend all day feeding money to them. I know how addictive that sort of shit is for me. And they had a video game called Lunar Lander, which didn't appear on the streets for years. And they didn't even have a console. You had to use a light pen on the screen to adjust the angle of the lunar command module and the landing module and the rocket thrust and all the rest of it. But out of the few kids who had a go, I was the only one who successfully landed the lunar module on the surface. And then the computer took over. Here's a feature that never made it to the video arcades. At Lucas Heights, some smart ass had written a subsidiary program so that anybody who successfully got the lunar lander onto the surface of the moon, once they got 5 foot off the moon, the scale magnified and you had to come down a much rougher piece of terrain. And if you got that done, then the computer took over. And when you looked into the room next door, into the warehouse-sized room full of tape drives, whereas when the boffins in their white coats with their punch cards, they could make a third or maybe half the tape drives start to spin. When the computer took over the video game of the Lunar Lander to fly up over the mountain and into the next valley and land in the parking lot of a McDonald's hamburger shop, and the 2 little astronauts got out and took their hats off and walked into the McDonald's, all driven by the Lucas Heights computer, every tape drive in the room next door was going. So the cleverest thing that those boffins could do with their computer was play a fucking video game in 1977 at the nuclear research station. And I knew how addictive video games were for me. So I decided never to get involved in them. Now, people who have computers generally replace their computer every couple of years because it's out of date and they want a new one. So if I'd got a computer in 1979 with my first job's pay packet, I would have had 17 friggin' computers by now. How many thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars would I have spent on updating them and devirusing them and upgrading them and getting them new this and new that? How much pollution have I saved the planet by me not having a computer? I reckon it's a significant amount. And then you get the effect on the individual. My kids used to laugh at me when I said I didn't want to have a computer because I didn't want to fall into them. My daughter bookmarked a YouTube channel on my mobile phone, and while I was trying to answer comments and leave comments that would draw people to my channel through the wittiness and eccentricity of the things that I think and I say, I was spending 16 hours a day answering comments, and that went on for 6 months. Right? 6 months, 16 hours a day, trying to get people to come back to my channel in the hope that they would maybe see a sunfoil movie and maybe decide that they were going to put a streamlined solar panel on the roof of their car because that would save them some fuel and that would save the planet some pollution. Of course, YouTube is not a functional venue to transmit useful information around the world. And nothing practical gets transmitted by YouTube. I can't get people to pay attention to sunfoil by making YouTube movies. But I do enjoy venting, being the fool on the hill, the mad scientist, the hillbilly hermit. So I've kept on going. But I'm not going to risk imperiling my mental health by getting a computer just so that I can get the post comment button back again. Since I lost the post comment button, I've had 9 or 10 hours a day that's mine to do with my life, whatever I want again, because I'm not constantly trying to be polite and answer people. And my view count and subscriber count have continued to climb at an identical rate. So that 16 hours a day of me trying to get people to come to my channel to have it was all fucking wasted. Completely fucking wasted. And I'm starting to take the attitude to people who demand that I get a computer so that I can have the same technology and access to it that they've got. I'm taking the same attitude to that you get with somebody who's been going to Alcoholics Anonymous for 35 years when some prick comes along and offers them a glass of a new whiskey they've just tried. Or somebody who's lost his job and his house and his family and his life savings to the poker machines gets when somebody comes up and says, "Oh, come and have a fucking horse in the sweepstake on the Melbourne Cup. It's un-Australian if you don't do it." I'm just not interested in going somewhere that is just a trap for me. I came close when it was explained to me that the Samsung Galaxy Y is, quote, a mobile phone that's designed, to run the Android program so that you can do the whole Google Plus thing. I went to a supermarket and I bought one. A Telstra prepaid Samsung Galaxy Y for $60. And I brought it home and I read its book of instructions. And if you'll excuse the frank racist superiority in the overtones here, it was techno-Chinglish. Right? It was crap. I'm filming this on the third Nokia that I've had in a row, and Nokia's instruction booklets, not only are they written in competent, grammatically correct English, they're written with a viewpoint that assumes the customer may never have had a mobile phone before and may need instruction from the bottom up. I looked at the Samsung attempt at an instruction booklet, and not only is it techno-Chinglish that was so bad you couldn't fly a rubber-powered model aeroplane on the tips they give, but the very first thing it says is, if you can't, get satisfaction with this book, go to www.stickitupyourass website and have a look at the instruction book there. And I thought, well, fuck, that's not going to help me, is it? I can't work a computer, and you've got to be able to work a computer to figure out how to work the instruction book. So I searched on YouTube for Samsung Galaxy Y tutorial, and I got a blonde woman with big tits who lives in New Zealand, going by the accent, sucks instead of six. And the first thing she informed me of was that the Y in Samsung Galaxy Y stands for youth. It's aimed at the youth market. And then she went into 15 minutes worth of instructions, and maybe for the first minute and a half I almost sort of followed what she was on about. And the further I got into it, the more convinced I became that the Samsung Galaxy Y is not a mobile phone. This is a mobile phone. It's got a big screen and a QWERTY keypad, but it's still recognisably a mobile phone. This thing I'm filming on, it's got an alphanumeric keypad and a smaller screen. But both of them are mobile phones which will connect to the internet, and they will allow you to watch a YouTube movie. This one, the one I'm filming on, it allows me to upload too, but Optus is pretty fucked, it won't. This is Telstra. The Samsung Galaxy Y is a pocket-sized touchscreen computer which has several menu screens, and at the very bottom of the last menu screen there's a button which, as a afterthought ancillary function, allows one to make mobile phone calls. It's not a mobile phone, it's a pocket computer. And I swore off computers 35 years ago for the same sort of reasons that alcoholics swear off booze and gambling addicts swear off the horse races. So, you know, if anybody thinks they're going to do me a favour by sending me their second-hand or old or used or even a fucking new computer or anything resembling one so that I can play the Google Plus game, forget it, I'm not interested. I got on YouTube specifically because I could do it with my existing mobile phone without having to fuck around with a computer, without having to risk the rest of my life being sucked into a screen, having my wallet sucked dry by trying to upgrade, fix or deviralise whatever bloody computer had me by the frontal lobes. You know, I'm avoiding that whole trap. I don't want to become dependent on them. And in the long run, I can't see techno-fascist industrial deficit finance barbarianism keeping your computer running for much longer either, because you're going to lose your power grid. Whether it's a solar flare, whether it's riots at the power station, whether it's extreme weather knocking the poles and the wires over, whether it's a fucking plague that antibiotics won't touch, or a new virus, you know, chikungunya crossed with pig duck virus or something that's been transformed into a human transmissible variety by Muslims at the Hajj. You know, taking out all the people who work at the power station. I don't see that it's a useful thing to do to cripple my ability to live by making a computer something that I'm dependent on. Right, so what other questions have I had recently that I want to answer? Amid Billow asks, is my land not suitable for digging a well? Amid Billow, when it rains really heavily, what you get in that depression is 2 inches of water with green slime growing on it, because the hut is constructed on top of a spring. I built it there not knowing it was a spring because I located it at the end of a drought, and what I saw was the flattest, so I didn't have to do much work to level it, greenest patch around. Okay, most of the time it's good. It means that my place stays green when everything else goes dry, so I got less bushfire risk. But the big idea was I wouldn't have to try and level it because I'm up on top of the hill. But the biggest thing, apart from the fact that when you're on the top of the hill, there's nowhere for the water to come from. Water in wells comes from the aquifer underfoot, which is fed from rainfall on higher ground. But there's also things like this. What this is, mate, is a piece of the weathered basalt dome which my place consists of, with a very thin layer of subsoil and soil and organic detritus on top of it. You'd need dynamite to blast into it, and you'd have to blast lower than the valley floor, so you'd need a 300-foot dynamite dug well. No, wells are not the go. What works is if I catch the runoff from the roof and I store it, and then I pull it out with a bucket. Now, this is for Gummy Royd, who suggested that I stop messing around with inflatable boy wool Chinese pools and get myself a proper water tank. Well, the thing is, a Chinese inflatable swimming pool will hold 5,500 litres, and it only costs $160, and every 2 years it eats a new ultraviolet cover, and they're $34.95 each, and you get an ultraviolet cover when you buy the pool. So this thing's $160 to purchase it. It's gone through $100 worth of replacement ultraviolet covers, and it's held 5,000 litres. With overflow capacity it can go up to 6, but when it goes to 6 I generally let a few hundred litres out. So 5,500 litres for 10 years. A 5,500 litre tank, it would stand up about this bloody high. So I'd have to shift it several hundred yards downhill, and then I'd have to have another tank back up here, and then I'd have to have a windmill or a solar power driven electric pump to pump the water from the downhill tank where the gravity from the roof puts it. Do you get my point? Then the 5,000 or 6,000 litre tank would cost a couple of $1,000. Whereas this thing, $300, and it runs for 10 years. So that's like less than a sixth of the price, and it actually works, and it's not as complicated. And if you're trying to save water, to conserve water, then having to get your water out of the buoy wall and carry it in a bucket up to where you're doing the washing at the hut, so that the water from the washing machine then runs onto the lawn and waters the lawn and keeps it a little tiny bit green. Even though we've got less than 1/4 of an inch of soil moisture profile, and we haven't had any rain since the 30 mils we got 2.5 weeks ago. No, this system works. It's cheap, it's low cost, and that's the other thing. I'm a pensioner, I pay rates on 100 acres endangered species sanctuary. I've got a daughter in her 20s who lives in a flat in town and she hasn't got a job, and I'm throwing all my spare money at her. There's no way I can afford a tank. You know? No way I can afford a computer. I'd love to have a proper water tank, but it would be in addition to the systems that I'm already operating, and I wouldn't stop using these systems anyway. And the update to the pad situation is that I've decided, yes, I will use the ancient choir matting as a buffer between the bare dirt and the pool I'm going to put onto it. And because I haven't got enough choir matting, I've got some old pot mix bags. So there you go, Warbles on a Lot update, and we'll see whether this uploads, because I'm assuming that now that the copy wrong strike has been removed from my movie and I've got the views back, hopefully I've got the long uploads back as well. Sorry if this disappoints those who have been waiting for me to get a computer and reacquire the comment button. Ain't gonna happen. Warbles on a Lot to YouTube. Ciao.